In order to prove the unity of the possible understanding, certain arguments are brought forward, which must be shown to be ineffective. For it seems that every form which is one in species and multiplies in number is individualized by matter. For those things which are one in species and many in number agree in form and are distinguished according to matter. Therefore, if the intellect possible in different men is multiplied according to number, since it is one according to species, it must be individualized in this and in that through matter. But not through matter which is a part of itself, because in this way its reception would be of the kind of reception of the first matter, and it would receive individual forms, which is contrary to the nature of the understanding. It is left then to be individuated by the matter which is the body of the man whose form is given. Now, every form individuated by the matter of which it is an act is a material form. For it is necessary that the existence of anything depends on that on which its individuation depends. For just as the general principles are of the essence of the species, so the individual principles are of the essence of this individual. It follows, therefore, that the possible intellect is a material form, and as a result, it cannot receive anything or work without a bodily organ. This is also contrary to the nature of the possible understanding. Therefore, the possible intellect is not multiplied in different men, but is one in all. Again, if the possible intellect were different in this and in that man, it would be necessary that the species understood should be different in number in this and that, but one in species. Intelligible species according to number in different now species or forms which are the same in species and different in number are individual forms, which cannot be intelligible forms, because intelligible are universal, not particular. It is therefore impossible that the intellect should be multiplied in different individuals of men. It is necessary, therefore, that there should be one in all. Still, the teacher imparts the knowledge he has to the student. Therefore, either the same number or a different number, not specifically. The second seems to be impossible, because in this way the teacher would cause his knowledge in the pupil, just as he causes his form in another, by generating something similar to himself in appearance, which seems to belong to material agencies. It is necessary, therefore, that he should cause the same knowledge in number in the pupil. This could not be unless there were one possible understanding of both. It seems necessary, then, that the understanding possible is one of all men. But just as the aforesaid position has no truth, as has been shown, so the arguments put forward to confirm it are easily dissolvable. For we confess that the possible understanding is one in species in different men, but many in number. So that, however, there is no force in this, that the parts of man are not placed in genus or species according to themselves, but only as they are the principles of the whole. And yet it does not follow that the material form is secondly dependent on the body. For just as it belongs to the human soul according to its species to be united to such a body according to its species, so this soul differs from that number only in that it has a relation to a body of another number, and thus human souls are individuated, and consequently the possible intellect, which is the power of the soul according to the bodies, not as if individuation caused by the bodies. But his second argument fails from the fact that he does not distinguish between what is understood and what is understood. For the species received in the possible understanding does not have itself as what is understood. For since all the arts and sciences are about what is meant, it would follow that all the sciences are about species existing in the possible understanding. This is clearly false, for no science considers anything about them except rational and metaphysical. But nevertheless, by them all, things are known in all sciences. Therefore, the intelligible species received in the possible understanding has itself in the understanding as that which is understood, not as that which is understood. Just as the species of color in the eye is not that which is seen, but that which we see. But what is meant is the very reason of things existing outside the soul. Just as things existing outside the soul are seen by bodily sight. For this purpose, arts and sciences were invented, so that things existing in their natures could be known. And yet it is not necessary that because the sciences are of universals, that universals are subsisting outside the soul by itself, as Plato put it. For although it is necessary for the truth of knowledge that the knowledge of the thing corresponds, it is not necessary that the mode of knowledge and the thing be the same. For things which are united in a thing are sometimes known separately, for both white and sweet are one thing at the same time, yet sight knows only whiteness and taste only sweetness. Thus also the intellect understands a line existing in sensible matter without sensible matter, although it can understand even with sensible matter. Now this diversity occurs according to the diversity of the intelligible species received in the intellect, which is sometimes a similitude of quantity only, but sometimes of a quantifiable sensible substance. Similarly, although the nature of the genus and species never exists except in these individuals, yet the intellect understands the nature of species and genus without understanding the individualizing principles, and this is to understand universals. And so these two things do not contradict each other, that universals do not exist outside the soul, and that the intellect, understanding universals, understands things that are outside the soul. Now that the intellect understands the nature of a genus or species stripped of its individuating principles, occurs from the condition of the intelligible species received in it, which is immaterial produced by the acting intellect, as being abstracted from matter and the conditions of matter by which something is individuated. And therefore the sensitive powers cannot know universals, because they cannot receive an immaterial form, since they always receive it in a corporeal organ. However, the intellect understands the nature of species and genus without understanding individualizing principles, and this is to understand universals. And so these two things do not contradict each other, that universals do not exist outside the soul, and that the intellect, understanding universals, understands things that are outside the soul. Now that the intellect understands the nature of a genus or species stripped of its individuating principles, occurs from the condition of the intelligible species received in it, which is immaterial produced by the acting intellect, as being abstracted from matter and the conditions of matter by which something is individuated. And therefore the sensitive powers cannot know universals, because they cannot receive an immaterial form, since they always receive it in a corporeal organ. Therefore, it is not necessary that there should be one intelligible species of this intelligent, and that, for this would follow that there should be one understanding in the number of this and that, since the operation follows the form which is the principle of the species. But it is necessary, in order that there should be one understanding, that there should be a similitude of one and the same. And this is possible if the intelligible species are different in number, for nothing prevents one thing from being made into several different images, and from this it happens that one man is seen by many. Therefore it is not inconsistent with the universal knowledge of the intellect that there are different intelligible species in different ones. And for this reason it is not necessary that if intelligible species are many in number and in the same species, that they are not actually intelligible, but only potentially, like other individuals. For the fact that it is an individual being is not intelligible being. For it is necessary to say that the intellect itself is possible substances, not united to the body and subsisting by themselves, are supposed to be certain individuals, and yet they are intelligible. But that which is opposed to intelligibility is materiality, the sign of which is that, in order for the forms of material things to become actually intelligible, they must be abstracted from matter. And therefore in those in which individuation takes place through this signified matter, the individuated are not actually intelligible. But if the individuation takes place not through matter, whether there are several possible intellects or one, but they are not multiplied in the same species in the same way, therefore it matters nothing, as far as the species received in the possible understanding are actually intelligible, whether the possible understanding is one in all, or several. Again, possible understanding, according to the aforesaid commentator, is the last in the order of intelligible substances, which indeed, according to him, are many. Nor can it be said that some of the higher substances do not have the knowledge of what the possible intellect knows. For in the movers of the world, as he also says, there are the forms of those things which are caused by the movement of the world. It will still remain, therefore, although the possible understanding is one, that intelligible forms are multiplied in different understandings. Although we may have said that the intelligible species received in the possible understanding is not what is understood, but what is understood. However, it is not removed unless by a certain reflection the intellect understands itself and its own understanding, and the species by which it understands. Now he understands his understanding in two ways. In one way in particular, for he understands that he is now understanding. In another way, in the universal, according to what is reasoned about the nature of the act itself. Hence he understands both the intellect and the intelligible species in the same way in two ways. And by perceiving that he is and has an intelligible species, which is to know in particular, and considering its nature and that of the intelligible species, which is to know in the universal. And according to this, the understanding and the intelligible are discussed in the sciences. By these things which have been said, the solution of the third reason also appears. For what he says, that knowledge is number one in the pupil, and the teacher is partly true, but partly not. For it is number one as regards what is known, but not as regards the intelligible species by which it is known, nor as regards the attitude of knowledge itself. However, it is not necessary that the teacher causes knowledge in the student in the same way as fire generates fire. For the manner of things generated by nature is not the same as that of art. For fire naturally begets fire, reducing matter from power into the act of its form. The teacher, on the other hand, causes knowledge in the pupil by means of art. For this is given the demonstrative art, which Aristotle delivers in the latter. For a demonstration is a syllogism making one to know. It must be known, however, that according to what Aristotle teaches in Metaphysics 7, there are certain arts in whose material there is no active principle to produce the effect of the art, as is evident in the case of building. For there is no active force in the wood and stone moving to the constitution of the house, but by aptitude, passive only. Indeed, there is some art in the material of which there is some active principle moving to produce the effect of the art, as is evident in medicinals. For in a sick body there is some active principle for health, and therefore the effect of art of the first kind is never produced by nature, but is always produced by art, just as every house is by art. But the effect of art of the second kind is effected both by art and by nature without art. For many are healed by the operation of nature, without the art of medicine. But in these things which can be done both by art and by nature, art imitates nature. For if anyone is sick from a cold cause, nature heals him by warming him, whence also the physician, if he must treat him, heals by heating. And like this art is the art of teaching. For in that which is taught is the active principle for knowledge, namely the understanding, and those things which are naturally understood, namely first principles. And therefore knowledge is acquired in two ways, and without learning, by discovery, and through teaching. A teacher therefore begins to teach in this way, as a discoverer begins to find, namely by offering to the pupil's consideration the principles known to him, because all instruction is made from pre-existing knowledge, and by deducting those principles into conclusions, and by setting forth sensible examples from which the phantasms necessary for understanding may be formed in the soul of the students. And because the outward operation of the teacher would do nothing unless the inward principle of knowledge, which is in us divinely, was present, therefore it is said among theologians that man teaches by presenting a ministry, but God by working inwardly, just as a physician is called the minister of nature in healing. Thus therefore knowledge is caused in the pupil by the teacher, not only by natural action, but by artificial action, as has been said. Further, when the aforesaid commentator posits that the habit of knowledge is in the passive intellect as in the subject, the unity of the possible intellect does nothing to the fact that there is one knowledge in number in the pupil and the teacher. For it is evident that the passive intellect is not the same in different people, since it is a material power. Hence this reason is not for the purpose, according to his position.